Hi, fellow tea lovers. Settle in because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose, and today we're bringing you the tea.
Across eras.
All right, guys, we're back with a little bit of the backstory behind Monarchy and True Love.
I have it much better now as a peasant, because let's be real, that's what I am, than I would have as a peasant back then.
I think I would have pegged you as one who prays. So the three estates,
praise?
the three estates of humanity in the Middle Ages: one who prays, monks and nuns; one who works, everybody else; and one who fights, the warrior poet.
Okay, yeah, I guess because I wouldn't, if I lived back then with my current attitude, I would have to be a nun because I certainly didn't want to get married. That makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, you have to think of them in broad definitions.
True.
They definitely fit everyone, kind of. It's like a square shoe. You can walk.
Right, like my sister. Okay, so speaking of the ones who work, so my sister's in physical therapy right now for her back, and her physical therapist tells her, "You have abnormally strong legs." And she says, "I didn't want to tell him, it's because like my ancestors are potato picking during famines. Of course I have strong legs.
I have that stout Germanic lack of sunshine in me.
Woohoo!
What can
I know. Wasn't raised near the ocean going swimming every day or anything fun like that." Okay. When you say War of the Roses, it sounds, that's like a pretty name. I know war's not pretty, but I don't think I learned anything about it in high school that stuck with me. So, what's the War of the Roses?
And to be fair, while it is a pinpoint of English history, it's also, if you're not into it, it's not necessarily something you're going to know the details of. The rose bit is the two warring houses that were fighting over the throne for at least 3 generations. Were represented by the Lancaster family. Was their symbol was the red rose, and the House of York was the white rose.
Okay.
Which is why when Henry Tudor takes over after the whole mess, he unites their symbols as the red and the white rose. So like on the gates in the Tudors, when you see them riding by, it's the red rose outside the white rose. That's actually intensely symbolic. That is all over the Tudor court.
So fighting over the throne for 3 generations sounds hilarious. I'm sure it's not. But so what was the deal? Like, where was the fight coming from? Who had the rightful claim?
Well, the thing is that they all did. They all just have different versions of the claim. I have strong opinions about this because I believe that John of Gaunt should have been allowed to take over from his father. So backing up a little bit, Edward III, very successful king, has lots of sons. Their sons have sons. The succession is secured. He has the pinnacle of princely manhood lined up to succeed him, the Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock. And interestingly,
Edward of Woodstock?
Yes. What? Woodstock Palace, not just a fun jam.
That's amazing.
It was one of the sort of Petite Trianon type country retreats.
Oh.
Sort of.
I mean, I totally need a country retreat.
Don't we all?
So he was called the Black Prince?
Yes, he was an extremely good soldier. So, if you see him on the other end of a battlefield, that's a black day for you. I'm sure there's a lot of other variations of how the name came about. That's how I always thought of it.
Okay.
In A Knight's Tale, the guy that knights Heath Ledger is playing Edward of Woodstock, Black Prince of Wales.
Oh.
Which is also, amazing is, I guess, not the word. It's something I always laughed at because he died of dysentery. And so he actually, post-knighting Heath Ledger, quote unquote, goes and dies the death of Sir Ector in the very beginning of the movie.
Oh, wait, dysentery, isn't that diarrhea related?
Yeah, absolutely. Bad water is all over battlefields, and unfortunately, you shat yourself to death.
Remember playing Oregon Trail in elementary school?
Yes.
I feel like that's what everyone died from. Oh, man.
Yeah, dysentery is actually shockingly hard to avoid when you have still water sources. And basically, it's bad water poisoning.
When did people, and maybe you don't know this off the top of your head, when did people decide like boiling their water was like a really cool idea?
Well, it always was considered a reasonable idea. Like boiling things to make them clean is actually much older than the idea of recognizing germs.
Oh, okay.
And so people saw the effect long before they really understood why. Like garlic as an antibiotic, antibacterial.
Yeah.
That was very well established before anybody ever talked about germs or bacteria existing. It's just, you want a wound to not go bad and kill you, try the garlic. That guy, Pete survived.
My homeboy Pete. Gosh. Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Edward III, he has everything, heir and spare, and 5 more behind him. But the Black Prince dies, and it throws everything into chaos because and this is where I disagree with it, rather than giving the throne to any of the adult sons that are left, because of the laws of succession, Edward's son,
Yeah.
who I think is 7 at this point,
Oh.
inherits the throne. So then you're thrown into a regency.
Regencies never go well.
A great idea because there's a variety of people. I'm the closest to this child, so therefore I should run this country.
Okay, that makes sense. Because, like right now in England, the succession is Charles, William, but now that William has George.
Harry is that much further removed.
Because it's George, then Charlotte, then Louis, then Harry?
Yes. So that's just the origin point. So then, because Edward's son, he becomes Richard II, and, regencies, they don't go historically well. The family of John of Gaunt, who is the 3rd son, they're sort of the other side. That's the Lancastrian side of the family. So John of Gaunt, also flower of medieval manhood, poet, warrior, inhabited all of the estates of the soldier prince.
Yeah.
Fully would have been capable of running the country, and just the whole mess started because nobody wanted John of Gaunt in there.
Well, he was the 3rd son?
He's the 3rd son, but he was married to Blanche of Lancaster, and so that's where the name for that offshoot of the family comes from.
Who was the 2nd son?
Lionel of Clarence.
Nobody liked him either, I guess?
He died way before all of this was a problem. He was the smart one.
Okay.
So they're all Plantagenets at this point, but this is the point where the 2 houses that are going to be fighting over everything kind of split off. So interesting that you ask about the 2nd son. So that's Lionel, Duke of Clarence. He dies before the whole thing pops off, but had kids, and so his line gets into the mix further and further down. A lot of the claims that come up a couple of generations after are matrilineal claims. Like almost all of the ones that win out and get any power in this conflict are through their mothers.
Okay.
So just fun side point.
Like realistically, 1st son dies, 2nd son is already dead, 3rd son is reasonable and not an idiot and makes sense. But that's not how it goes.
No. So basically, the kids of the 2nd son and the 3rd son football the crown back and forth through a very interesting set of wars, which I would love to go into more in depth. That'll be several episodes.
Okay.
But we get all the way down to the bottom. You're left with extremely few heirs, and you have Henry Tudor. He's Henry VII. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, is the source of his claim.
Okay.
So Owen Tudor falls in love with Catherine de Valois after her husband dies, and she's a free agent. She was married to Henry V.
Okay.
And so he dies. She's the rich widow, mother queen, and so that's like her retirement gift to herself, is this strapping Welshman.
Hey!
And so down through that line, you get Margaret Beaufort, and so that is a lot of Henry VII's claim. Is through the Valois side of her line, but she's also a descendant of John of Gaunt, with his mistress, later wife, Catherine Swynford, who is also an insanely interesting character.
I wish so much that we could do a 23andMe on all of these royals, because we would be booting out so much of the bloodline.
Which is exactly why they actually legally will not allow their DNA to be tested.
Girl!
That is actually a huge piece of controversy. When they found Richard III's parking lot body, the immediate question was, can we test against the royal family? And the royal family politely said, oh, fuck you.
I mean, with good reason.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of things that would end up getting really muddy really fast.
Dang it, why won't we be alive in 150 years when they do this? Because you know it's going to happen.
You know.
Oh my gosh, it would be so gossipy. It would be the tea.
Yeah, well, and you know what the tea about Catherine Swynford is that actually so many American leaders are descended from her. Alison Weir did this amazing book about her that I can't recommend more, but she did an end chapter with all world leaders that were descended from the Beaufort lines. The Beauforts got around. They were not from an originally royal family, but they really were the progenitors of royalty.
Wow.
Yeah. And so Henry VII, he's been raised in France because he is this, he's got a medium to high claim to the throne, and that's enough to be dangerous. Like, it's not even really a great claim, but it's enough
like
that
France is so far away that
right?
they're like, oh, go all the way to France.
It was technically England. He was in English territories. That
Oh.
was still when they had some English territories. Henry VI lost a ton of that. They had Calais for a fairly long time. Every bit of French soil got lost, but that was actually from Eleanor of Aquitaine. Obviously they wanted to grab as much territory as they could, but when Eleanor married him, they got a gigantic chunk of France, which is also partially why France always kind of hated England, because they owned a lot of the good land. Like, it wasn't just you own a lot of our land. Like, that's the wine land.
I got
it. That's the land of ladies and poetry. What do you mean the English own it? Yeah,
right. The
it's
English
amazing.
don't really seem to be like ladies in poetry
in
comparison to how imagine it to be, which is wrong, because I think I've told you this. When I went to England, I thought that I was really going to like England, but that I was going to fall in love with France. And that didn't happen. I mean,
I had a similar experience.
Okay, but I do, yes, there's a term for that, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's like a term for when you go to France and it's not as good as you expected it to be.
Specifically for France.
I think it's actually specifically for Paris.
I believe it. I wanted it to be so good, and it's never been good back to me.
In my defense, I spent 12 hours there. So it doesn't really count. We took the train through the Channel. Is that what it's called? The Channel. Over to France, and it was super cool. And then we went back to London that night. But if I went back now, number one, I could use my smartphone over there. At the time I went, I was on Verizon, and you couldn't just like take your, I probably didn't have an iPhone, it was probably like a BlackBerry, over there and use it. You would have to like rent a special phone just to use over there.
I remember that.
Okay. Isn't this so weird?
I know.
And so I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So I didn't have any kind of translation. The only thing I had done was commit to absolute memory the train routes for like, the metro to the places we were going to go. Because I didn't want to like bust out my printed out papers and be like, such a tourist. Because, you just have that like idea of Paris. And it wasn't it.
It is its own thing that is beautiful and strange.
It was amazing.
But it's not what you're told you're going to experience.
Right. And maybe if I knew the language or could communicate better, or if I had more than 12 hours. But like the Eiffel Tower was brown. Yeah.
And expensive and long line. I looked at it. I looked up from the bottom and went, I'm good.
Same. We got in the line and we're like, we're here, we're going to the top. And then after we'd been in the line like 40 minutes, somebody translated a sign for us that basically said, by the time you reach this sign, the top's going to be sold out or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah. I think it was just because of the time of day and like eventually it's going to close. I don't know. Plus, when we were standing there in line, there were people who would like get in your face and be like, do you want to buy my plastic Dollar Tree Eiffel Tower souvenir?
Oh, yeah. Those guys are pretty aggressive.
They were really aggressive. Also aggressive were these like, they looked like young ladies. I don't know how old they were. But they would go up to obvious tourists around the Louvre and be like, I just need your help and like buy this thing for me. It was a very weird scam.
Interesting. I didn't encounter that one, but I've only ever been to Paris with ladies or as a single lady.
I was with ladies and they didn't talk to me. They were, we saw them talking to like older people, but I loved England. I mean, that's probably because where all my ancestors are from. And maybe it was like the ancestors were calling me or something.
Lack of language barrier helps, but
faux show. Although there were plenty of people, and I'll be like, I'm so sorry. What did you say the total cost was? But that, also like coins are different. So that didn't help. At the post office, when I was like, why aren't you giving me my change? It's like £4. And the lady just looked at me like, you paid with paper money and not coins. Why would I give you change? It was really weird, and she was very huffy giving it back to me. It was.
And unfamiliar? I've gotten change from a post office. I think she just sucked.
Probably. And the place I would go to in the mornings for cappuccino and traditional English breakfast, I thought beans on toast were going to be like code for something.
Oh, no.
Because like spotted dick is code for like some kind of dessert. And desserts are called puddings. So getting a pudding is like a dessert. It's not like
you could reasonably
pudding.
Extrapolate. This might be something different than No, it's beans on toast.
No, it's just beans on toast, and I loved it. But when I would go there, I would always be like, here's my, like a 5, 10, whatever pound note. And they're like, girl, we see all that change in your purse. Yeah. Pay with that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because it's like kind of stressful and embarrassing. And I'm like counting it out. By the end of the trip, I was really good at it.
When I got my first job out there, I'm very comfortable with cash registers, worked a lot of customer service jobs. It never once occurred to me that the money difference was going to be such a problem. Like I
not at all.
Lived there for a while. I had counted money many times, and I felt very comfortable with the change until first time the drawer pops open and there's twice as many coin slots.
Yes.
I was unprepared for that noise. That was some adaptation.
Okay.
Oh, what part? Okay, so Margaret Beaufort is obsessed with her son taking over the English throne. She spends her whole life working towards it. He grows up in France where he's safe, learns to be a soldier and all of that. Richard III, through fair means and foul and everything in between, ascends to the throne. And he's killed by Henry Tudor. He's the last English king to take the throne by force.
Oh.
And so, Battle of Bosworth, the Tudors are born. He goes and marries Elizabeth of York to solidify the alliance and say, hey, both bloodlines are now inheriting. And that is the Tudors. And so that is why, even though I am often talking about the Tudors, it is really, really likely to skip backwards into War of the Roses because there's so much formative information. Like the Wars of the Roses give so much context to both the Henrys and every other Tudor because you can see why they were obsessed with the succession.
Right.
Because all of these generations of succession problems have now distilled down into this one marriage. And they have one adult son left, which is Henry VIII. And so this entire dynasty is sat on his head. And if he doesn't produce a son, all of his entire family's work goes to dust. And so while he was real jerk-offy to many of his wives for many reasons.
Oh, he's the one who murdered a whole bunch of his wives.
You can the 6 wives of Henry VIII.
No excuses for Henry VIII. That does give me a good bit of context.
You can understand why the obsession begins. Not why it should exist, not justifying its existence. No. But that's a lot of pressure. Okay. He did have a son with Jane Seymour, who's wife number 3, who arguably he liked the most. He asked to be buried next to her. You don't want to say it's a benefit, but she had the benefit of dying directly after producing the son, and thus never pissed him off again. And so lives in holy memory as his favorite wife. And it's debatable if she'd lived, he probably wouldn't have gotten married. That would have been a done deal because Edward lived after Henry VIII. He lived to succeed him. He died really, really young. Henry VIII did die believing that he had fulfilled the succession.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? I can't imagine what it would be like to be raised with this absolute tome of your history and your ancestry and all of the secret twists and turns that have brought you into existence at this point in time.
Your house wouldn't be anywhere near the throne if John of Gaunt didn't love his ladies.
Right. But like
because you're a Beaufort descendant.
The weight of that and then being like, must secure the line. I mean, at least now with the Windsors, at least now there's less pressure on like having a boy or a girl. But clearly there's still the whole heir and a spare thing.
Oh, absolutely. While slightly less complicated, the succession is so complicated. It's a lot of weight. Public life does not sound like a fun time. I don't care if you get the sparkly things.
Absolutely not. Shout out to Holly Madison. I think I said this in our last episode when she said, I don't want to be famous. I want to be rich and hot. And I'm like, yeah, same girl, reasonable. Same. Okay, I have to tell you something though. Every time you said Richard III, I immediately thought, of course, of Lionheart. I know Richard I was the Lionheart. But I just think about him, because of the Disney Robin Hood.
It's the issue that I have too, is that, there are like the 5 names that pop up over and over again. And it is difficult to keep track of the numbers and pull them out of a hat. Richard I, that's a special case for me for 2 reasons. Because Eleanor of Aquitaine, his mother, is my hero, is one of the coolest, if not the coolest, medieval ladies that existed. Okay. That's a whole arc of episodes.
And that was several years.
That was 200 years before what we were just talking about.
Okay.
That's the first reason that the Lionheart sticks in my head, but the second is the Disney Robin Hood, because mother always liked you best, mommy.
Yes.
John is his younger brother.
And John actually spent a lot of time sitting on the throne,
He was arguably the most successful ruler of his brothers, because Richard, he was a very successful king, but he also managed to get kidnapped and spent most of his reign on campaign on the Crusades. So he's kind of an absent ruler.
I didn't know about getting kidnapped.
Eleanor of Aquitaine actually traveled to Germany in her 60s to rescue.
Those carriages back then, it's not like she got to go in the comfort of a plane or even a train.
Oh yeah, leaf springs don't get invented until way after. You've got a leather sprung wagon basically with a cover.
I feel like that would have just rattled my guts out of my body, and I would have needed 3 years to recover.
It's not
returning home.
Ride. No, it's actually, even though it's considered a lot less ladylike to ride the horse, it's the most comfortable way to go.
And that's not exactly super comfortable. When I was in first grade, I saw the Disney Robin Hood movie for the first time, and I fell in love with the fox. And I came home.
Did we all?
Yes. And I acted out, the scene where everyone else is around, like, the campfire singing songs, and Robin and Marian are, like, in love. And, of course, I was Marian, and my mom was just like, what is wrong with you?
They're foxes.
Well, she didn't even know that was the thing. She was just like, why are you moping around the house? And I was like, I'm not moping. I thought I was, like, being swoony.
Romantic. Oh, you are not alone. No, everybody loved that fox. Every one of us. And I think that's where we'll end it for today. But thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.